Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Alexander. I'm our head of AI at Cross Country Consulting, and this is Field Notes. Today, we're going to talk about our lead to cash cycle or your revenue cycle. This is really the lifeblood of any business. It connects your front office to your back office, and it's how you're going to make money and drive bottom line value creation. And we really think this is the unlock for where AI can provide so much value. So today we have with us our firm expert in this area in lead to cash, Oscar Palacio. He is a partner in business transformation. When you hear his background, you'll understand very clearly why we asked him to be here today, and looking very forward to the conversation with Oscar. So Oscar, welcome. Thanks for coming in on Field Notes. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
And I appreciate it, Tom. So I started my career off at Deloitte within audit, and that also did some IT risk advisory. After that, I transitioned to an accounting advisory firm where I mostly did technical accounting, financial reporting, interim controllership. Did that for about 8 years. Then went as an operator, went into industry at Vice Media. Within that, the first year and a half, I was the global controller in charge of centralizing accounting and finance across 43 countries. And then from there, I went back to the previous advisory firm to launch their business transformation practice. So I quickly saw the opportunity to kind of shift to start a tech practice to implement NetSuite, Intact, Dynamics, Salesforce, Adaptive, Data Warehouse, BI tools, just to help facilitate them going public. And then about 14 months ago, I joined Cross Country to help lead the finance and business transformation practice, obviously with a technology lens.
Yeah, when I love talking to Oscar because it's always, he's got a tech architecture roadmap in his head. He's touched every function. He's integrated every technology. So he is absolutely a go-to when we have these kind of problems to solve and helping clients with their architecture and story. So with that, Oscar, I do want to ask you about lead to cash. That's our focus today. Realize that you have been in and out of every process, through the office of the CFO and well beyond. But as I said in the intro, lead to cash bridges the front and back office. If you get this right and wire it up right, this could mean competitive advantage for your company, value creation, squeezing every dollar out of your technology investment. So tell us how you think about the process in general of lead to cash.
Yeah, for me, lead to cash is where strategy meets reality, right? A lot of high-growing businesses, they've invest a ton of money in the front office, right? And finance is kind of secondary, but at the end of the day, finance is the one that's kind of left reconciling when budget doesn't hit actuals, when invoices incorrectly, when there's revenue leakage, when DSO is highly inflated, and they're the ones kind of giving the answer. And I think one of the main issues is that when companies are investing money across technology and functions, they do it in a very siloed component, like they're just implementing a CRM, so they're only, involving the sales functions and ops. When they're implementing an ERP, it's mostly just accounting. And I think that's a fatal flaw because even if you don't want to impact, the front of the house, you need their collaboration and their input, regardless if, with whatever you're doing from an accounting and finance perspective. And similarly, if you're investing in the front of the house, you should involve, finance, accounting, and ops so that they can highlight any downstream dependencies that are ultimately going to impact them, right? So that cross-functional collaborative component is probably the most important because, I'm with a client right now where they invested in the CRM, they invested in the ERP, and even from lead and marketing perspective, it's not converting to something taggable once it becomes an opportunity. The product SKU is completely messed up in the front end of the house where then sales is going and just doing their quotes offline, which then once it hits billing and invoicing, the invoices are incorrect. Customer gets angry, then they're offering discounts and incentives. And then DSO, I think right now for them is about 47 days. So right now, after spending over $100 million On the technology providers, we got brought in a year and a half later after the initiative started to really connect the dots between marketing, sales, ops, finance, accounting, data, and IT, where I think we're probably going to unlock, just from a liquidity perspective, close to 20 million by just reducing DSO by 5 days in a 6-month sprint. And I think we identified about 4 million of missed billings just because, sales, they're of the view that it takes so long to get like any sort of upsell into the system that if it's not material, they're just giving it away for free to make the customer happy because they don't want to deal with the issues of going into the system and spending a full day just, to get, a 20K opportunity in.
So the process isn't wired up right for them to be able to want to engage with it. And the cost of that is 4 million in your example and all of the downstream and probably delays in the DSO.
Yeah, and everyone's burnt out. I think one of the core issues that they experienced was that they implemented the CRM and the ERP through a technology first lens, right? They're like, hey, let's make our business fit the technology. The reality of it is that their business is a combination of 40 acquisitions. Each one works distinct. They didn't harmonize the operating model. Therefore, they found so many issues during testing that now we're going back, harmonizing just the full end-to-end model so that then we can actually configure the system to align to how they go to market versus try to align how they go to market with how the technology is working.
Okay, love that. So starting with a strategy and wiring it up to support that strategy. And this, another concept you kind of touched on there was, oftentimes when you have a very long accounting close cycle, or it takes you a long time to close the books, or when you see some of these DSO metrics start to drift out, finance starts to take the fall for those. But really, it was because you didn't think through the end-to-end process. You didn't get cross-functional teams involved and solving for all the business needs, and then the systems don't talk to each other.
Yeah, 100%. We just got hired by a PE sponsor to do 25 2-week diagnostics across their portcos, and we just finished the first 2, and the focus was exactly that. One of them was a field services, a fleet services company, where the billing teams relying on the actual field technicians to close the work orders. The reality of it is that the technicians get paid weekly, so they wait until the last day before payroll to actually close the work orders. A lot of the time it's missing documentation, so then it takes another 3 to 5 days to actually get the bill out the door. We did the analysis and saw that if you implemented simple policies and a tracking mechanism to see how long a work order stays open, who the key players from a technician perspective are in terms of causing the major delay, and you implement a policy that you have to close it within 48 hours, that facilitates, in that particular example, I think we could reduce 3 to 5 days of close. The business isn't huge. I want to say it's $30 million top line, but we were going to free up $2 million of liquidity just by doing that.
So let's talk about AI a little bit here. We're getting into the process and the wiring and tying in the strategy. But we've talked about in previous podcasts that we've got our Jumpstart approach. And our Jumpstart approach is that we come in with vibe coders as part of our assessment period. We also do the normal interviews where we're looking at people, process, data, and technology. So we're doing these 2 things in parallel. But with the vibe coders, we like to attack the outcome because it will tell us a little bit more about, the persona-based experience, what data may be needed for the models to achieve those outcomes. And it's very complementary, to some of the assessment work that we do. So I'm wondering, as you have got into some of these discovery sessions, what have you been able to uncover? What's a good client example of where you've been able to flesh out either AI opportunities or just lead to cash, overall process opportunities in general?
Yeah. I think one of the, sensitivities in the space I mainly work with, which is let's call it small to mid market, right? Is that a lot of these companies don't feel that they're ready for AI just based on, multiple ERP systems, multiple POS systems. But But the reality of it is that there's certain areas where you can definitely leverage the AI to facilitate at least some of the important metrics and some of the dependent tasks that then enable them to actually get invoices out the door. A good example is we had a software company that does both direct to consumer and B2B. From a B2B perspective, they use resellers like insurance providers and whatnot that can provide, that then ultimately sell to an end company that then provide their software as a benefit to employees. And the benefit could be paid by the company or could be paid by the employees. In that scenario, they're reliant on those resellers and partners to send them files of like their projections for the year in terms of companies they're going to onboard. That then once they actually onboard, then they send an email that gets converted to the actual opportunity from the pipeline that's in Salesforce. So the client was essentially manually uploading that information into Salesforce, reviewing the email, then going in and converting that pipeline to an actual opportunity to then go through the sales cycle and close it. Within that, like there was a quick win opportunity. They were leveraging Databricks and Boomi to actually take the Excel file from a pipeline perspective, import it into Salesforce, then actually be able to read the email to then automatically convert, that pipeline opportunity into an actual opportunity within Salesforce, queued up with the contract, actually review the contract and cross-reference against the opportunity to make edits, which just freed up, I think it was like 2 individuals who were just manually doing this and trying to reconcile everything. The client got excited. One of the main issues that they had dealt with was that for a lot of the resellers, like they were actually not doing the invoicing. The reseller was doing the invoice, and then they were just receiving cash payment. Like obviously they had their product system that was tracking a lot of the subscriptions, but because of just the volume, they weren't reconciling in terms of what they thought the subscriber count was versus what the partner was saying. They were just taking the partner reporting for what it was. So within Databricks, we were able to put up a reconciliation agent to essentially consume the file from the partner, integrate the product system to Databricks to then essentially highlight any key differences to see if there was any potential revenue leakage, which there ended up being.
Sounds like you constructed agents along the entire course of the process in some ways, whether it be the front end to influence the sales, some of the data reconciliation or just cleanup issues that happen along the way. And all of this is more autonomous. And then the value creation on the back end is the result, or just maybe the unknown, right? So these are the things that when we come in and we apply AI into the mix, we start to uncover some things that are under the surface that may not be, and that's why we get asked to come in, honestly, because the systems aren't talking and things are moving slower. One of the things there is also, this is now AI starting to put these kind of alerts at your fingertips, right? So it's like these clients are starting to drift, potential revenue leakage here, DSOs or bills that are starting to, be returned or not be correct. And these are the things that hold you up and cause clients to turn over.
Yeah. I mean, that and, I think one of the bigger use cases that we're seeing now is just instead of being reactive to customer turnover, it's being proactive, right? So really understanding customer volume and movement to understand, number of invoices reissued, potential credits given, and more or less what that trigger point is, after X number of invoice reissues, how much money are we losing by just giving it discounts to keep them happy. And then, after that, what's that customer turnover life cycle, right? Like, if a customer has, pretty clean invoices and data, right, they're least likely to turn over than these customers who, the invoice is reflecting incorrect, not just pricing, but products as well, right? I think, one of my other clients, they had configured Salesforce where they were within just a notes component, putting the discounts and incentives, and then they were relying on the Zora team to manually review the text box, right, to then actually issue the invoices. That resulted in a 30% invoice rate. So this one wasn't AI specific, but we're like, hey, like Salesforce can actually have the fields to reflect the discount and things and items given for free at the line item level, so that then your Zora team isn't having to manually review text boxes, right? Like that way it just flows directly into Zora. The invoice is correct. So yeah, I mean, but being able to kind of build some dashboards around that, like, gives you a competitive advantage in terms of really being proactive and remediating course, whichever it may be.
Yeah. So I love that you're getting into diagnosing some of the symptoms with AI, right? So you're digging into the root cause of what's going on with your customer portfolio, pricing. These are the things we don't think about or maybe don't see with the naked eye when we get just a dashboard.
Yeah.
Right. And you get once a month reporting, you wait for the close to happen, take a look, what happened, who do we lose, who do we gain? But what's really going on under the surface, you can identify those insights in real time.
That, and, from a customer experience perspective, we've been able to do some neat things. We had a separate SaaS company that had multiple customers, but each customer had multiple locations. So think about it like as a Kohl's, right? Or a Marshall's. So whenever they onboarded these new clients, they would sell this like massive Excel for them to load the different locations that they were wanting to activate. And then the team was then having to take that Excel, and because of like the product system limitations, they would have to activate each location one by one, which if it was like 4 or 5 locations, that's pretty easy. But some of these had hundreds of locations. So being able to turn on the meters for a couple hundred locations took weeks, right? So what we were able to do is build a UI interface, a customer-facing UI interface, where they just got a link. They filled out the information from a location perspective. Once they submitted, that was fully integrated to Salesforce to create the locations in Salesforce. And then we created an agent in Snowflake that essentially took that information and created the meters within the production system on a pretty much same time basis to actually turn on the accounts in a matter of days and not weeks. Similarly, in terms of turning off accounts, whenever a customer was 90 plus days from invoice payment, was also very manual because they had to go one by one. So we somewhat replicated that agent, but more from an inverse perspective, where there was essentially a different dashboard that our DTNA set up that highlighted the customers that were 90 plus days. We created some controls and checks within that, where someone would review that listing on a weekly basis, because there were some customers where they were negotiating, whatever it may be, so you didn't want to turn those off. So that way we cleansed the list to like the final customers that we did want to turn off, and we fed that list to Snowflake and the agent that then would find the locations and then turn them off within the production system.
So I love the constructs here, Oscar, and you're hitting on a couple concepts, getting under the root cause. You mentioned some of the user experience on the front end. One of the things we're starting to see in the market more commonly is even at the CEO level, definitely CFO, for all the key personas for leadership groups across functions, we're seeing the ask for, can you create my avatar? Can you create my single pane of glass where I'm seeing the blinking red light that's warning me that some of these things are happening? I've got my KPIs that are just allowing me to manage my business, but construct my avatar so that I can show up every day for work with a user journey that are the things that I care about. And it's not about that you're sending me 30 or 40 dashboards to look at now in a month, but it's that I have a living, breathing kind of avatar to work with. And that's backed by some of the agents that you're talking about. So I'm curious, are you seeing something similar in the market, or what's the value proposition of some of these single pane of glass experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's ultimately different personas within an organization that are going to want to see different things, right? Some of them more ops heavy, some of them more finance and accounting heavy, and some of them more, sales and front end heavy. I think there's this conception or misconception that the data has to be perfect in order for you to be able to build those dashboards, right? The reality is that it doesn't, but you do have to really understand what the key data elements are, right? And then ensure that, let's call it from like a data dictionary perspective, everyone's speaking the same language. And what I mean by that is, sales might call something an account that finance and accounting call something different an account, right? Just based on how the system calls it, right? So kind of setting up that front end data dictionary and let's call it lineage is important to then highlight the critical data components that then ultimately drive those dashboards and KPIs, right? Again, that takes some cross-functional collaboration so that like the different personas are completely aligned. Obviously, the data mostly lives in different systems, right? It could live in your ops system, it could live in your CRM, it could live in your ERP and your EPM. But at the core, right, like if you have a data warehouse and you've built out that data dictionary and lineage, you can kind of centralize everything, tie it together, and then create these dashboards, right? That are really powerful and allow you to be more proactive than reactive, right? And kind of managing your business because you can see trends. You can then see how historical trends had impacted revenue leakage or revenue turnover, or even if, my bookings doesn't equate to my revenue, why is that? Do I have some issues in terms of my integration or my, product SKU or pricing, which then allows you to remediate course to then prevent future issues from happening and actually be able to achieve your targets, right?
Okay. Yeah, some really good concepts here on creating the data definitions, but in the moment, not creating a data forever project, right? Like trying to get right at the outcome. And then the continuous monitoring that could occur if you were to build these the right way. One of the things you were saying was around, the cross-functional nature of designing some of these and kind of bringing together, key elements of the business or, what various functions care about. But my view is that this is a great opportunity as you're designing these things for the C-suite to come together and really align on strategy. Is our strategic plan represented by the avatars we're creating? What do we all want to respectively look at? What are we all responsible for, accountable for? That should all be on everyone's front screen, right? And then the data to support it.
Even are we speaking the same language, right? Like at the end of the day, within an organization, data is that common language, right? But if, I don't know, your CRM's in Russian and your ERP's in English and you don't have a translator, then what are you really doing?
That's a great way to put it. Okay. So big picture concept there, but then I'm wondering, some of the more advanced companies are starting to move away from just prompting to more of building a single agent. And then we're starting to see now, and you've mentioned a couple of use cases where you've kind of orchestrated agents across a process. So I'm wondering, what are you seeing out there in the field, in the market, as far as what some of the more advanced companies are doing?
Yeah, I'm going to flip this a little bit because we're working with a technology partner that's actually building out something that is, if it actually works, it's unbelievable, right? So they're essentially, if you think about like an ERP, right? Like you're pretty reliant on your accounting policies to then really configure your ERP so that, you're recognizing revenue per 606, or your lease accounting is, you're differentiating between operating and capital leases and then, recognizing proper financing costs or not. What I'm seeing right now with this particular platform is that they're able to upload your accounting policies, around rev rec, cost accounting, lease accounting, like the more complex accounting areas. And then you're able to upload the accounting literature. And then it's like the whole concept of an AI-driven ERP, except that they're not calling it an ERP. It's taking those policies, and then you're just ingesting the contracts, right? Like every single revenue contract that you execute, you ingest it, cross-references it against the policy to then create, they're not calling them journal entries, but it's essentially create the rev rec schedule that then is going to be posted for the foreseeable future. Same from a lease accounting perspective, same from a fixed accounting perspective, fixed asset accounting perspective. So like the ability to construct something fully end to end is somewhat scary because at the end of the day, like it impacts your financial statements that then get audited. But on the flip, how many material findings do auditors find because, you didn't do a proper analysis on the contract because you just assumed that it was pretty similar to a different one. You missed some key elements and therefore your rev rec is wrong, right? So the ability of these agents to actually look at your accounting policy, like actual accounting literature, and then cross-reference it against the contracts is unreal.
So in your example, how do you stay audit ready?
A lot of it, I think, it's like you kind of have to become an internal auditor, right? Versus actually executing the work is just doing some sample sizing, doing some monitoring around what the agent's actually doing, right? So it's more reviewing the end output versus doing the analysis, creating the end output, and then having someone else review it. And as we know, that's a lot of work. It takes a ton of headcount. Sometimes there's cost pressure where you have, the same individual, putting the journal entry together and reviewing it, which violates tax controls. So, I see a shift to a more analytical workforce that's, somewhat technical, that understands what the agent's doing, but then also understands what the intent of it is to then, again, just review on a sample size.
So maybe as you're designing all of this, bringing in internal audit or bringing in even your external auditors and making sure they understand how the evidence is going to be produced.
Yeah, I think that partnership with the external auditors is important. I had one client where, they were implementing a pretty robust AP automation tool that's driven by AI. It just happened that their year end fell on an off period. The tech platform had a bridge letter, but the bridge letter was meant to cover 3 months, not 6 months. And this particular auditor just kind of threw up all over it. They're like, no, then we need so much documentation around like remediation controls and really documentations in terms of what the AI agent's actually doing within the system. But then, like, obviously you have to understand your auditor, their sensitivity, to then be able to put the proper controls and documentation in place so that then you don't run into audit issues.
Okay. I love those concepts. I would add maybe even construct, the agent that's monitoring the agents. Yeah. So we're starting to see a lot of continuous monitoring agents out there, controls, and we've helped clients construct that strategy as well. So with that, Oscar, I'm curious just your own personal journey with AI. So we've talked a lot about how you've helped clients. I assume you've been on your own kind of learning journey and what you've learned over time, or just, you have been an operator for so long that you've probably seen this technology in the past and how it's progressed over time. So just tell us about your own personal learning journey and how you've been getting comfortable with AI.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I was a bit skeptical at first. And the reason for that was when I rejoined consulting in 2019. That's when the whole RPA boom was happening. The RPA was the future. And then I never saw it materialize, right? So at first I was a little cautious. I'm like, hey, is the same thing happening, right? But then, I started using it myself, right? To understand the benefits, to understand potential, let's call it concerns, right? And I found it really powerful in accelerating how I deliver my day to day. Like, I don't think there's a day right now where I'm not on ChatGPT or Claude, just having it serve as my business analyst. So by using it firsthand in my day to day, really expanded my mind and the capabilities if done right, right? And now just seeing what the team's been able to do from a quick wins perspective, whether it's just facilitating, putting together the cash flow, again, feeding the same assumptions that an individual would be fed, or 13-week cash flow, or just like key dashboards has been, again, really, really powerful. So it's how do we address their direct ask, which is fixing what's broken, but then providing them some quick wins that enable quicker ROI through just leveraging AI in areas that make sense.
I like one of the points that you made around it. This is only going to be as good as the data that you feed it, right? But you don't have to create a forever project. So carve into the area that you want to try to solve for, maybe even ask it the questions that help you clean the data sets up. Where are things uneven? It's a good way to drive integration as well, or at least, through some early prompting, you can get some symptoms as to where the things aren't talking.
Yeah. And that data cleanup component is probably one of the ones that I've leaned into the most recently. I think it's a 3.5 billion top line client, that the one I mentioned, that's 2 years into an ERP and CRM implementation. They're now in the process of migrating about 30 to 40 legal entities into the CRM and ERP. They have Snowflake, but one of the core issues with the companies that they've already migrated was that they had tasked individuals to review the origination CRM data, the origination ERP data, and the order form to reconcile the three, make adjustments, to then import clean data. The reality is that you're dealing with thousands of contracts, short time frame, and the pilot had an 80% error rate between what was fed into Salesforce, what was fed into Workday with the order form. So we were brought in, and we quickly pivoted to leverage Snowflake and set up an agent that essentially consumes the data from the CRM, consumes from the original CRM, consumes the data from the original ERP. And then we're using Snowflake's OCR and AI capability to actually import the PDF of the order form to reconcile the three and deal more with exception handling than someone manually having to review every single contract.
So hopefully the audience out there is gathering just how knowledgeable Oscar is about all of these various tools and the ways to help your client or prevent some of these disasters. I would ask you this, Oscar, maybe for a last question and a wrap. Where do you see companies making transformation mistakes in this world of AI? Where are the transformation failures happening, and what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think I touched on it a ton. The main component, it's really identifying the cross-functional team, right? It's not just the ones that are directly impacted, but the ones that are indirectly impacted, or the ones that indirectly impact whatever initiative you're undertaking, right? So kind of having that cross-functional steering committee and cross-functional team is very important. And then the other component is just general change management, right? A lot of companies have great project managers, but they don't have that program level manager that really understands the different components of the different initiatives, the interdependencies, that then can translate that into pragmatic change that is bought off on by the different parties within the company, right? I think one of the things I really, really like about, the approach that we take with these diagnostics and these transformation initiatives is that, we partner with the different stakeholders across the working team so that then they feel that the solution and the ideas they help develop, right, which then helps them get energized and actually push the change within the org. Most organizations, if they see a consultant go in and tell them what to do, a lot of people have change fatigue, or just culturally they're like, oh, what does this guy know, right? But when we partner with a key stakeholder, and it's that key stakeholder that we're empowering to kind of drive the change, it's just very much well received, and the probability of succeeding actually goes up a ton.
Yeah, we are there to partner with these clients. When we bring the Vibe coders in, we're there to show you how to use these tools. We are trying to enable them with these diagnostics to do their job better, to create a better insight. And that's the partnership we provide. So, Oscar, every time I talk to you, I learn not just one thing. I learned many, many things. And it's obvious you're doing great things in the market. So really, really appreciate you being here today. And if I were to just try to summarize, there's so much value in what Oscar has laid out for us today. But somewhere between the value of collaboration, what you can prevent if you wire your systems up the right way and take a minute to think through the architecture and getting folks to talk around the table about how this all ties to your strategy, bringing auditors to the table to collaborate with you as you're designing some of these processes, and making sure AI enablement is going to be audit ready in many ways, and just integration, orchestration, humans in the loop, and how to design for that. So we've learned a lot of things today around lead to cash, and that's going to be the unlock for you driving your business. So Oscar, thanks again for being here, and that'll do it for Field Notes. See you next time.